This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Today, we journey back to one of the most pivotal moments in American history, the Battle of Gettysburg. My guest is Tim McGrath, award-winning author of James Monroe, A Life, his new book, Three Roads to Gettysburg, Meade, Lee, Lincoln, and the battle that changed the nation. It's an epic and revelatory account that shines new light on George Meade, Lincoln's unexpected choice to lead the Union Army alongside Robert E. Lee and Abraham Lincoln himself. With meticulous research and compelling storytelling, McGrath explores the decisions, lives, and legacies of these three men as their paths converged on that faithful Pennsylvania battlefield. Three Roads to Gettysburg has already earned critical acclaim, with Library Journal calling it, quote, well researched and expertly told, an ideal choice for U.S. Civil War and military history buffs. Tim McGrath joins me now to talk about the lives, the letters, and the leadership that changed the course of our nation. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, Tim. Three Roads to Gettysburg. What first inspired you to tell this story through the lives of Lincoln, Meade, and Lee?
That's a good question for a start off. Uh, my agent, Jim Donovan, who's a terrific writer in his own right, as John Lennon would say, and editor at Time, a wonderful guy who became a good friend, Brett Howard. And Brent suggested doing a biography on George Meade. And I started doing a little bit of looking into it. And a wonderful history professor, Jennifer Murray, has been diligently at work on a book. It's been delayed a couple of times. I got to meet her a couple of years ago. And I had read her book about the Gettysburg battlefield. And I said, I don't want to compete with this. She's lived it and breathed it and everything for years. So we started talking, and I was intrigued, Steve, about uh, the background of all three men is so diverse, and yet there's so many similarities. And what decisions did they were made for them as young men, and the decisions that they made afterwards, and how they played a role in the battle, and then obviously in Lincoln's immortal speech.
Meade is often overlooked in Civil War history, of course, compared to Lincoln and Lee. What drew you to make him a central figure in this book?
Well, it was an easy choice since he was 3 days into being the commander of the Army of the Potomac. But he always fascinated me. He's almost like the George Harrison of the Union generals. He's not nearly as not Lennon and McCartney. He's not Grant. He's not McClellan, which is good, but a very steady hand. And his life story was really terrific. His uh, as a he was the son of a very wealthy and a successful merchantman and businessman, Richard Meade, and who at the time of Meade was born in Cadiz in Spain, one of many children. And Richard's life fell apart. He was almost, you could say, arrogant. He had a huge library in Cadiz, and word got back to Jefferson and Secretary of State Madison about this great guy who was angling to be the consul and everything else. But he seemed to offend people. He ran roughshod over quite a few. And but when the Napoleonic Wars came to Spain, he lent his fortune to the Spanish government to help cover the costs of the war. And as it ended, uh, they weren't in all of a hurry to pay him back. It was about $500,000 in 1815 money, not current. So you can just imagine how many millions that would be. And he kept pushing a little too hard the wrong way and wound up in prison. And when he returned to the States, he immediately applied to Congress to help him with this. Ironically, when James Monroe and his Secretary of State John Quincy Adams uh, worked out the deal to buy Florida from the Spanish government, uh, the agreement was that the United States government would pay a couple of $1 million, a few $1 million to Americans who were owed money by the Spanish government. So Meade immediately went and said, "Well, you guys then owe me $500,000." But that was more than 10% of the amount, and they weren't about to spend all that much on one man. So he argued until he died in the 1820s, and his family argued well into the 1850s or so, where's this man's money? So it pretty much left his wife and his children not destitute, but certainly on less secure footing they could have possibly imagined just a few years before. So that was the jumping off point for that.
You've written deeply researched biographies before. Tell us about your research process for this one and what surprised you most in the letters and documents you uncovered.
We are full of good questions today,
Mm.
Steve. The research is easy. You write down, you outline what you want to know about someone or these men, and where can I go to get it? And there's certainly great secondary sources uh, on books. You know, uh, Burlingham's two huge volumes on Lincoln for one. Douglas Southwell Freeman's trilogy on Lee are very voluminous and great stories, but there's more accurate storytellers that have told Lee's life story. Currently, Alan Gelzo just did a terrific book. But what the documents for those, and obviously with Meade, are pretty much all over the map. But it was a lot of fun finding out what was where and who. The surprises to me uh, with Lee and Meade, it was their engineering talents. And with Lincoln, it was really, we all know how much pluck this guy had and how wonderful a leader he became. But I'm a sailor, and the thing that found me interesting with these gentlemen, as with anybody in biography, they don't just go from point A to point B. It's a voyage, and you're tacking back and forth, and you're hitting shoals and everything else with their lives. But I would say with Lee and Meade, it was their singular successes in engineering, and with Lincoln. It was the fact that even as a young politician, we're looking at a frontier Lyndon Johnson here.
Mm.
There's a point in his 20s where he's part of a group of assemblymen called the Long Nine because they're 6 feet plus tall. And they let the young kid Lincoln work out a deal to move the state capital from Vandalia to Springfield. And he's making deals right to left. There's going to be railroads coming through. If you agree to vote to move the capital, I can get you 9 votes to make sure that there's a railroad station where you live. And you're looking for something with a canal or waterworks. We can do all this stuff. He's like 28, 29 years old pulling this stuff out of his hat. And it gives you a good idea about him. Um, Lee, early in his post-West Point career, is sent to the Mississippi, to St. Louis, which is in danger of becoming dry docked because the flow of the river is changing significantly to the point where it's too shallow along the waterfront for St. Louis. They're worried there's not going to be anything, where we're going to go. And he's given an assignment of fixing this. There's silt-made islands, one of which is called Blood Island because that's where men go to fight their duels. And he astutely goes up towards the rapids near Iowa, where the Mississippi flows. And like, if we can figure out a way to, explode narrow venues through these rapids, through these rocks, it will increase the flow of the water and wipe out the silt. It's terrific. Um, there's historians talk about Lincoln made 2 trips as a young man down the Mississippi to New Orleans and how those trips changed him with what he saw in the way of how, firsthand the auction of enslaved persons. He lived in neighborhoods where the people had enslaved persons, but this really hit him. So people say that Lincoln's trips changed the changed him down the Mississippi. Lee, on the other hand, changes the Mississippi. And then with Meade, being from, the Philadelphia area, I knew he built lighthouses, and I knew Barnegat and Cape May and Absecon had been designed by him. But Steve, he designed and built lighthouses from New Jersey down through the Florida Keys and some places where they had failed to do so. And he comes up with so many ingenious solutions to the issues of the where to build and why. He comes up with a structure that improves the lighting that is so great. He's invited to an exposition of inventors in New York City to explain his Fresnel light. It's really the happiest years of his military career is this work as a lighthouse builder. And while almost all of them are no longer in use, quite a few of them are still standing. There's one in the Florida Keys where several times the little building for the lighthouse keeper and supplies and the wharf were all washed away by hurricanes, but the lighthouse he built didn't budge an inch.
The title, Three Roads to Gettysburg, implies a convergence, three lives, three paths. How did each man's personal journey and decisions bring them to that defining moment?
I think, it's obvious with Lee and Meade that their military careers were, a great thing that moved them along. And it's interesting to see the paths that they had in wartime before. Meade is an early arrival in the Mexican War and serves as an aide under General Zachary Taylor, uh, Old Rough and Ready, as the press call him. And he takes into account in the first battles at Palo Alto and then later at Monterey, you know, Taylor's got everything figured out what to do and where to go and make the most use of always having fewer men than the Mexican armies he's facing. And Meade writes home about that, and he's flattered that he's part of Taylor's uh, uh, group of aides and part of his retinue. Um, Lee comes down under Winfield Scott, old Fuss and Feathers. And Scott again is working with an army smaller than the armies he's fighting, but he's interested in taking risks and taking initiatives. And the primary officer who helps him do that is Robert E. Lee. He's being sent out to scout before and to find routes that they can somehow flank Santa Anna, who he's dealing with in different battles, and really risking his life. He is at one point is spending most of the night hiding behind a log while there's a company of Mexican cavalrymen within, 50 feet of him. So you look at that and you think about them arriving at Gettysburg, where neither of them were present when the battle started. They didn't choose the battlefield. The battlefield sort of chose them, as did their aides, their top generals. But then when you look after the first day of fighting, Lee arrives late in the day, Meade arrives that night when the fighting is over. But by then, the Union forces are placed on Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. And this is the high ground, the ground that, Meade had watched Taylor covet. He had also seen the disadvantages of not having the high ground, most recently at Fredericksburg, where ironically, Meade's leading an offensive that comes this close to breaking the Confederate lines, but he doesn't get reinforcements. So you can see him looking at this and going, yeah, we're sticking around here. And at the same time, you think about Lee's background in Mexico and seeing how, the offense was taken and there was a good bit of planning and thinking, but a lot of daring do with that. And that sums up pretty much Lee so far with the Army of Northern Virginia. He's always outnumbered. And the bluffs and the feints he does, ably assisted by Jackson in 62 and up until Chancellorsville in 63, he's really the Army of Northern Virginia is already getting known in European circles as this wonderful, successful group of men, not nearly as well equipped or armed as their opponents, but constantly winning because Lee's outgeneraling his opponents. And so for him to look across that mile and so of open space from Seminary Ridge and figure out ways of attacking, it's not a surprise. They talk about him having health issues, but he's still determined that I can attack. More than once he says that is where the enemy is, and we are going to fight him. Uh, with Lincoln getting to Gettysburg, uh, you can't imagine what he must have felt after Chancellorsville. He's literally got his head in his hands after such a staggering defeat. And what will the country say? And he's trying to work with Joseph Hooker, who he doesn't want to dismiss, but Hooker keeps giving him reason after reason to do so. And finally, July or June 28th, he basically, when Hooker offers to resign, he goes, okay, fine. And he picks Meade. Early once General John Reynolds, another Pennsylvanian and a friend of Meade's, and Reynolds is looking at it not just from a standpoint of duty, but also the political bit. Am I being set up to fail? So when Meade gets the orders at 3:30 in the morning from an officer he knows, Major Hardy, Colonel Hardy, he just says, I don't want to do this. And Hardy just says to him, this isn't an offer of command. It's a command to command, and takes him there. And Lincoln has been desperate looking for a victory to do certain things. We all know he took Antietam, which I guess was a Union victory, but everybody considers it sort of a draw. But that's strong enough for him to plan on issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. And so that's 6 months old when Gettysburg is fought. And it hasn't gone down so well, both in the Army and with the public. But he sees this battle and the fact that they're now beginning to put in harm's way the black regiments of soldiers, like the 54th Massachusetts, that's so famous. And he comes to Gettysburg invited as an afterthought. Edward Everett, as many of your listeners or watchers, viewers know, uh, was the principal invited speaker who'd been orating in front of presidents for over 40 years. He had a long oration at a event down in Washington when Monroe was president. And, but Lincoln comes along and depending on which version you want to use, but around 270 words, he not only states what's happened at the battlefield, but who we are and who we can be or who we should be. And that's the road he takes.
All in just that short speech. If you could have dinner with Lincoln, Meade, or Lee, who would you choose and what would you want to ask him, Tim?
You know what? I'm going to take the coward's way out here. Um, if I had dinner with Lee, I think I would be asking him on July 3rd, why did you do this? You've won all of these other battles. If you didn't win at Antietam, you at least stood the high ground and the give and take of the battles, and everything else. But, this battered army, which had been decimated by his own troops not showing up, uh, feeling, well, I'm defending Virginia. I'm not going to go to Maryland. But he stays the next day because he knows McClellan and he calls his bluff. Uh, he knows he's seen what Meade has done, and he still feels I can do this. I can crush him. If Stewart comes around from the back with his cavalry, we can catch him. And it obviously did not work. Uh, with Meade, I would ask him uh, just how he kept his patience uh, during the battle when a couple of generals were certainly not doing what he wanted done. Dan Sickles comes to mind. If you've got time in your program, we should definitely have a little bit of time about Dan Sickles. Uh, but his patience after the battle is over and he doesn't follow up with to attack Lee and and isn't willing to risk losing his men. A few days later, during after one Lee has escaped Pennsylvania, Meade comes upon Lee at Williamsport, Maryland, and it's Gettysburg in reverse, and he knows that, and he will not fight, and then Lee is then able to cross the Potomac and get to Virginia. So I would almost not like to. I don't think you did the wrong thing. I'm an armchair historian compared to the professors and academics, but I'd love to know where did you find the patience and the resolve to just say I'm going to see my duty through. And with Lincoln, uh, I would ask him why he didn't go to Gettysburg right afterwards. He did visit some of the Virginia battlefields after that. And Gettysburg's farther, but it's only a train ride away. He could have gone there after Meade had or Lee had retreated. And if he had, I wonder if he'd been so disappointed, harshly so, of Meade not following up. If he had seen the fact that the the 50,000 casualties that were there were thousands and thousands of dead horses littering the battlefield. I think if he had seen the destruction and realized that at the end of that, the result of all that destruction was Meade won. Lee left Pennsylvania. I think he might have sung a different tune. That would probably be what I'd ask him. I mean, you could ask Lincoln. I think the best thing you do is just shut up and say, "Tell me your story."
Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to Sickles. Talk to me about Sickles.
All right, try this guy on for size and see if he sounds familiar. Dan Sickles is the son of a New York successful real estate speculator. He goes to the best schools. It's already a Democratic stronghold, so Sickles becomes a sycophant to Martin Van Buren. Later on, he's the amanuensis for James Buchanan when he goes to be the ambassador to the court of St. James in London. When he comes back, he runs for Congress. He has married a very young lady, Teresa Bagnoli, whose Italian-born father is the music teacher to the children of New York society and a conductor, an orchestra conductor. Uh, but Meade or Lee, blah, 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 not enough sleep, Tim. Sickles is having affairs. And when he gets elected to Congress and goes down to Washington, he strikes up another one. By now, Mrs. Sickles is feeling two can play this game. So she has an affair. And he finds out about it. And he's saying to his colleagues in Congress, how could she do this to me? And gets so incensed that one day he follows her out of their house, which is not far from the White House, to where she's having her assignation, and then lets her leave. And when the gentleman comes out, he knows who this is. He's the Attorney General of the District of or District Attorney for the District of Columbia. And Sickles confronts him and like, why, all that. And oh man, look, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And Sickles reaches in to his uh, coat pocket, pulls out a revolver and empties it into his wife's lover. His wife's lover is Francis Scott Key's son. So Sickles is immediately arrested and he puts together an OJ defense team, one of the leading attorneys being Edwin M. Stanton, that later becomes Lincoln's Secretary of War. Back in New York, George Templeton Strong, whose diaries Ken Burns used so happily in the Civil War documentary, writes in February of '59, we hear that Congressman Daniel Sickles has attained the high order and named the plume of murderer, and talks about what's happened. And then he goes, probably he will not even be indicted. Uh, and later, when he gets off, Strong makes the same kind of comments. Sickles becomes a political general with the help of Abraham Lincoln because he can use all the Democratic help he can for this war. But he's not really regarded as a very good general by his West Point peers. And the reason we know about the wheat field and Devil's Den and the peach orchard is because he disobeys Meade's orders to keep the line from Hancock's line down to the Round Tops and goes out a half a mile where the peach orchard and the wheat field are. And once Meade finds this out, there's fault to be like that Meade could have found out sooner. And he rides out and goes, what are you doing? Well, I'm at the higher ground. Well, if you kept marching, east, you'd find high ground all the way until you got to the Atlantic Ocean. But it's too late for him to move. Longstreet's attacked him, and Sickles loses his leg. Sickles is, as soon as he's able, which is a day later, he is on a train back to Washington. And who should come to visit him but Abraham Lincoln and his son Tad? Tell me about what happened at Gettysburg. Sickles is aware he could be court-martialed for what he did, and he's already plenty unpopular with Meade. And at some point, Sickles begins to tell the story that Sickles saved the day and the battle by going out to uh, the high ground he saw. And had he not done that, it would be Robert E. Lee heading into Washington and uh, and leaving that problem for Lincoln. And about March of 64, this is still back and forth, when an article appears in the New York Herald under the title Historicus, an assumed name. If it's not Sickles, it's certainly a good friend of his because it's how Meade wanted to retreat. Meade was a coward. It was Dan Sickles who saved the day. And while there's inquiries and generals like Warren and Hancock, and Gibbon stand up for Meade. There's generals like Dan Butterfield, who was the chief of staff that Meade was stuck with because he wasn't going to change that. He was a crony of Hooker's, and Hooker and Doubleday, who was removed from command because Meade was told he didn't fight such a good battle on the 1st of July. So they're all happy to concur with Sickles and make Meade's life hell for the rest of his life. He writes to his wife Margaret at one point, "You wait and see. It will be soon. It will be thought that I was not at Gettysburg at all."
Somehow I knew the sickle story was going to be a good one.
It is, and there's he's still around 50 years later when he's been very involved with uh, getting the battlefield to be made a national monument and the 50th anniversary and all of the soldiers from both armies that come. And he's in bad health. Mark Twain writes about a visit with him in the early 20th century and just saying, this guy never shuts up, just like I'm doing now. And it's always about himself. Uh, but there's a story that a dowager that came said to Sickles, "Oh, it's a shame there's no statue of you here." And he's, "Lady, this whole, monument to you." And he goes, "Lady, this whole battlefield is my monument."
Mm.
He's just unbelievable. I will leave it to your audience to try to figure out if there's a certain public figure in our times right now that sounds kind of familiar with. But
Great story.
anything disagreeing with Sickles, according to Sickles, would in today's parlance be fake news.
Right. He's Tim McGrath, award-winning author of Three Roads to Gettysburg, Meade, Lee, Lincoln, and the Battle That Changed the Nation. The book is available now everywhere books are sold. For more info, visit Tim McGrath's website or the publisher page as well. Tim, thank you so much for joining me.
Steve, thank you very much for having me. Best wishes to you and family for a happy Thanksgiving. And again, my thanks.
Thank you. You too. And thank you for watching the Speaking of Writers podcast. Like it, share it, subscribe to it, write a review. I'm Steve Richards. Thanks for watching.